Good afternoon. I know it's after the coffee break, so I need to warm up the audience a little bit, I was told. But I hope the content will speak for itself. We will not talk about less than reinventing banking, driven by GenAI and the current situations we see in the market. And I have a very international panel here, which I will introduce in a second. When we talk about reinvention and reimagine banking, we normally put 4 building blocks in it. And just to be very clear, when it comes to our research, financial services is by far the most impacted industry by GenAI. Around 68%, if you take banking, capital markets, and insurance together, GenAI will drive the business and will change everything we do at a normal bank. The only industry which is similar impacted is software development. So you see, everywhere where it's a core digital product, technology needs to drive business, to drive growth, and to drive efficiency. When we talk about building blocks, and this is out of our studies, but I condensed it a little bit, at the end of the day, we have 4 items we need to look at. Social rewilding, building the digital core, working in regulated guardrails, and focus on the talent. And I will just give a very brief introduction what we mean by this. Social rewilding means that coming from a very digital alienation type of customer interaction, getting back to a way more life-centric and human-centric way of banking. We are very much product-focused still. We need to shift this to a human-centric way. Everything which is becoming digital and you can basically straight through from onboarding to credit processing to payments processing, that's anonymous, which is good from an efficiency perspective. But what we lost in the last couple of years is the interaction with the customer, being a trusted advisor in everything which is financially matters, not only for retail, also for corporates and for small and medium banking. So this is what we mean by social rewilding. Using GenAI and becoming this new financial trustee in the system, you need to have your technology ready. This is why we're saying it's technology-based business strategy. You need to have your digital core. What do we mean by that? And we will hear a lot of things around this as well. You need to have the infrastructure ready. You need to be cloud ready. You need to have a data platform. You need to have an application landscape which is microservice-oriented, lean, and efficient. And you need to wrap security around it, because as you know, we need to be very cyber resilient, because there are frauds, there are cyber criminals everywhere. When we come to regulation, and we heard a lot about regulation, and normally the statement is the USA is market-oriented, Europe is regulated-oriented, and we have someone from Asia, and Asia is very consumer-oriented. But at the end of the day, we need to cope with our regulators, and we need to integrate them into our thinking how new business models will arise, because the data we are using will not go away, and we want to leverage it. So we need to talk to them, and we need to make them as part. And the good thing is, just the recent days, the EU Competitiveness Initiative will drive a softness in regulation. This is what we're all hoping for. So this is the chance and the moment to act. Last but not least, the talent. We are short on talent anyway already. GenAI can help us make standard procedures more easily to adapt for our employees and for our talent in the companies. But we also need to set up a system for continuous learning, because this is evolving, and you will not learn today what you will need in 5 years. So it's a continuous development. This is what we want to talk about in the next 50 minutes, and therefore I'm very happy to welcome my panelists on stage. Dr. Christian Brauckmann, member of the board, DZ Bank for IT and Organization. Jonathan Larsen, Chief Innovation Officer of the Ping An Group, coming yesterday from Hong Kong. And Professor Dr. Jan-Marco Leimeister from the University of St. Gallen. Welcome on stage. Before I hand over to Marco, just one additional point. There is an option to post questions in the app, the web app. You all have a link. There is a section questions. And we all agree that the panel loves to have some questions. So please post them, and I will filter. Good. Marco, stage is yours.
Thank you. So, hello. Great to be here. My name is Markus Leimeister. I'm a professor for information systems and digital business at the University of St. Gallen. And I research anything related to digital value creation. As such, we look at banks, financial service industries, and other industries. And we ask ourselves, what can we learn and understand to improve the digital value creation? That has those wonderful growth trajectories that we see in the software world. And the University of St. Gallen has a global exposure. We run a hub in Singapore. And I will report a little bit about the research findings we have from financial service industries outside Germany. And that might be something interesting to consider. And I'm well aware that Singapore and China have different regulatory regimes, and also that Switzerland is different to Germany. But nevertheless, there might be some interesting insights for you to take away. I will condense what I have prepared for today into 6 points. And the first one is, everything we've done and seen so far has a very simple punchline. If you're into growth, digital is the only way. So this means we haven't seen anything that has as much growth potential for financial service industries than digital. And most of that innovation around digital does not happen in traditional banks. It happens either in startups or scale-ups, or very often in other financial service firms. Interestingly, some industries you might not be aware of, such as private equity and other financial service industries. And why is that? Our assumption is that is because those players start with modern core technologies. They do not work with legacy structures overall. Second thing, looking globally, Southeast Asia, and especially Singapore and the ASEAN countries, are for financial services very interesting. They're growing markets, and the financial players there very often have interesting growth trajectories that outperform the US as well as Europe. Those players grow faster, and they do so because they have reinvented sometimes their old historic course. So I will share with you former state bank examples in Thailand and in Singapore that have turned the whole retail bank around to become digital powerhouses and to have growth numbers that I haven't seen in Central Europe ever. Last but not least, what they also do is they work in ecosystems. Very often they have basically the core platform for the original universal bank as the mothership, if you want to call it like that. And they work in ecosystems around the motherships, speedboats or whatever type of metaphor you want to use for that, where they develop a lot of innovative solutions to consumer banking. Looking at how they manage transformation, there are two things to know. The first one is they have all paid their technical debt. So they moved beyond the legacy tech structure, and as a function of that, developed operating models for a new IT infrastructure and business architecture. And these playbooks are very different. And very often they come with very integrated approaches to enable employees to take full responsibility of digital products end to end. And that is also something you see across the whole organizations, very often not structured in the traditional functional scheme of traditional banks, but following end-to-end logic. And last but not least, everything we've researched so far has a very simple message. Data-driven banks make faster and better decisions. And they are all more profitable. And they have more satisfied customers, at least in the consumer business. And finally, when you look at, depends on how you measure it, of course, but the amount of new financial products offered to clients or other criteria like that, they usually have a magnitude more of that than you would see in other parts of the world. So I think this is interesting to look at and to see what can be translated. And finally, do you see that I've managed to say everything so far without mentioning AI yet? Because that's the precondition. Anything I said is the precondition for anything that comes with AI. Because AI will amplify everything I said by an order of magnitude. Now, if we speak about AI in many other contexts, at least my mental model is very simple. You haven't fixed the digital stuff before that, your AI is not going to be efficient. It's not going to be as valuable. Right? So the second stage is the one that you want to consider. That's basically the punchline synthesizing what we've found in our studies so far. And I would like now to share a couple of conceptual clarity, maybe, at least for me, how you can make sense of what you see there. And what we use is what we call our digital transformation cube. And it visualizes 3 ways how to think about how to digitize or how to use AI. And it's a simplified model, but to me it works quite well. Let's see if it's useful to you as well. The first logic is you look at your internal processes, the way you want to have them, and you think around automation. Achieving more with less. That's a very traditional way how to go about IT. But if you do that in a very, very straightforward way, you end up not with improved existing processes, but with rather very efficient end-to-end automated processes. If you go along these lines, you can start building blocks that are very powerful to build other stuff on top of it. The second logic, and that's what you can learn from Asia especially, is to go consumer banking. Consumer banking wins on outstanding customer experience. If you build stuff like that, it looks very different. And the third logic is you can think about innovating digital products, what you can offer to clients. Again, a different logic. All these 3 logics can lead to digital value creation, right? They're very different in the way how you set up projects to achieve that, the way how you manage them, the way how you have to mobilize your employees. Looking at examples, on the automation end, I find fascinating 2 former state banks. The first one is DBS, the former Singaporean bank, much more innovative than any other bank I've seen in Southeast Asia so far. Completely entire new core banking system and a digital powerhouse with highly end-to-end automated processes. Also interesting, in Thailand, Krung Thai Bank, a former state bank, they managed by moving to their banking platform to go from 3 million clients to 40 million clients in 4 years. I find that fascinating. And the way how they do that is they have the mothership at the core platform and the ecosystem around that to build value-creating opportunities on top of that. But there are other players, and I've just picked one from PE, it could have been any other as well, but EQT, for instance, is setting up for everything they do, for their deal sourcing in private equity, for the due diligence, a platform that they call Motherbrain, to basically have data-driven processes to structure everything they do around their mergers and acquisitions and their deal flows. When you look at outstanding consumer experiences, you would find things like, in Singapore, from the UOB bank, the TMRW. It's a purely mobile bank. It's a user experience that is built for Gen Z people, that they enjoy. But UOW is a former retail bank, right? Being more innovative than others. And you find also very interesting examples, this year now, interestingly, from Luxembourg, to digitize end-to-end processes in the B2B context in a user experience way that I find fascinating. Fundcraft automates everything that a pension fund has to deal with, multiple limited partnerships and general partners in their private equity investments, so that you have the same ease of use of managing your financial partners like you would have as a retail client running your accounts. And of course, you can have wonderful new products that are outstanding, and I've shared with you. We're going to hear more about Ping An in a couple of seconds, but I've shared with you also a Swiss example that a lot of people are not aware of. It's a joint venture. It's called YUH. This is a joint venture of PostFinance, the former Swiss state bank, if you want to call it like that, because they're the only one sitting on a plain, new, modern core banking system, and they can do plug and play with others. And they're partnering here with this thing with Swissquote. This bank here has, last time I checked last week, 950,000 Swiss clients. Now, so that you get a feeling for size of market, Switzerland has 8.5 million inhabitants. They managed to go from 0 to 950,000 clients in one of the most overbanked markets I know. I find that remarkable, right? Every time, the same logic applies, and you can see everything comes out of the digital value creation logic. So hopefully some interesting things to consider. And if you want to do something in that field, we're more than happy to interact. Feel free to connect, to reach out, to shoot us an email. We're happy to engage. That said, thank you.
Thank you very much. So now having the scientific fundaments, just to recap, you need to get lost of your technical debt, right? GenAI will massively impact the industry, and for sure, you need to develop and enhance your digital core. And now, on a more technical view, I hand over to Christian Brauckmann.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot. I'm Christian Brauckmann, member of the management board of DZ Bank, and I'm responsible for IT, processes, organization, and security. Therefore, I guess you may not be surprised that I would like to talk a bit more about technical preconditions of new technologies, about infrastructure and architecture. From my point of view, it is essential not only to talk about solutions and applications, but also about the standards and security and about the rebuilding of the IT infrastructure to get rid of the legacy. First of all, I would like to tell you what happened at DZ Bank in November 22 when ChatGPT was launched. It was a kind of iPhone moment. From my point of view, it was a kind of iPhone moment because the solution is so convenient. Everybody can use it. Our kids use it at school, at university. It's easy and everybody can use it. Our communication department, very smart colleagues, innovative and fast, they published an article in our intranet which said, here's the link to OpenAI, use it, try it, and they encouraged the entire bank to use ChatGPT for banking purposes. It was interesting, everybody was keen on using it, and the next day came Killjoy, that was me, and I prohibited the use of ChatGPT via a notice until further notice within the bank due to security reasons and, of course, data protection reasons. At the same time, consultants and experts have started to flood the bank to promise a kind of brave new world, to promise an increase in efficiency, starting with 30%, 50%, up to 80% increase in efficiency. They promised if we use this or that solution within the DZ Bank. Demand rose dramatically within the bank, especially in the business lines. At the beginning, we had some dozen kind of use cases within our pipeline. It rose up to 150. Most recently, we have 200 use cases within our pipeline. So it was clear we had to do something, we had to hurry up, and we had to build the preconditions for a secure and compliant use of GenAI within the bank. So therefore, I would like to show you our platforms, but first of all, I forgot almost one more precondition. It was a very important task, of course, for the bank, and therefore I was very grateful that my CEO, Cornelius Riese, and I had a kind of sponsorship for this topic. First of all, we formulated a GenAI policy. It sounds easy, but it wasn't. And we had 3 dimensions for our policy. First of all, very important, you also mentioned it, enabling. Enabling of the people, of the colleagues, of the staff, how to deal with GenAI to talk about risks and possibilities. Second, of course, compliance and security. And third dimension, infrastructure, technique, very important. At first, it was very important for us because we had prohibited ChatGPT from the internet via browser. We hurried up, we had a lot of speed, and we could publish our own ChatGPT, DZ Chat, in summer 23, in our own private tenant, and it helped to try to train prompting, Yeah, it helped especially with the enabling of the company, of our people. At the same time, and I was very grateful that we had already started with, we called it digital readiness, with a rebuilding of our infrastructure. We had 2 cloud partners, Microsoft and Google, and of course we have our own premises, our own data centers, and we have started to build this infrastructure. It's simplified, of course. It's still complicated, I know, I'm sorry for that. But this infrastructure helps us for the efficient and secure use of the data center capacity within the bank. Our applications now, due to the virtual operations platform and the runtime platform, are, let's say, cloud agnostic. We can shift capacities from data center to Azure to cloud, and the people who run the application and use the application don't have to care anymore where it is run. When we had the demand of 200 use cases within the bank, my fear was that we could get a jungle of applications, different infrastructures, different platforms, and so on. So we built this platform. It is still under construction, not really finished yet, but it helps us to standardize the runtime platforms and the operation platform, and gives us, it is a kind of single point of truth. Sorry. At the same time, for GenAI and this platform, it doesn't care which kind of applications we use, if it's GenAI or some other thing, but it's a very important precondition for the use of GenAI, because one part of this new infrastructure is our GenAI platform. We have built this platform, and this platform is our, let's say, single platform of truth when we talk about GenAI. All use cases are run on this platform. We have 3 kinds of users of GenAI within the bank. First of all, the consumers. It's everybody in the bank, everyone. We have creators. Creators are colleagues from the business lines who build their own applications with the help of Power App, Microsoft Power App or Dataiku. And we have developers. These are the employees in my IT department which use AI for coding. And this, we can connect our data and documents. We can implement the model zoo, as we call it, ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on. And we have our own data storage. And this is the platform which is highly standardized, which is compliant and secure. And now we have started to scale our use cases. We implement them in waves of, let's say, some dozen use cases. And it's also mitigates, as I said, the risks of security and compliance, especially the EU AI Act. So, my key messages are, when we talk about GenAI, at every time you have to talk about the infrastructure behind it, how to run GenAI or other new technologies within the bank. If you don't standardize, if you don't automate, I promise complexity is going to kill you. That's what I wanted to talk about. That's what I wanted to show you. Thank you very much. Questions afterwards.
Thank you very much. So I took 3 things away. You are acting in regulatory guardrails.
Yes.
You're building the digital core, and consultants should not flood the bank. Okay, taking that. We still don't have any questions, so if someone is feeling, I have a question I want, otherwise I pick someone perhaps, use the app and say the question. Now, with all those foundations, happy to have Jonathan to give us an Asian view on how things should really work. Jonathan, stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Jonathan Larsen. I'm from Ping An. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Ping An, and I run our corporate venture fund. So firstly, thank you for inviting us and inviting me to be part of your session. We always like to reach out to new audiences and to new people and make new connections. Secondly, I was asked to talk about the Asia scene in general, And as probably all of you know, Asia is an enormous place with many, many countries, so there is no one Asia scene. But I'll make a couple of comments. But I was then asked to sort of talk about Ping An and the journey that Ping An is on as sort of one example within the Asia context that might be relevant to the topic today. I think the general point to make across Asia is, Marco has talked about some standout examples. Krung Thai is an example. There are other Thai banks. There are banks in the Philippines. Certainly DBS is an excellent story. But I think you'll find that most of the financial institutions across Asia are still struggling with the challenges that European banks are facing. And I think there are two that are really relevant. One is, how can you create something close to or equivalent to an internet native user experience? And I'll just make the point that I think as a user, within 2 minutes of dealing with a financial institution, whether they're internet native or not, whether they're Monzo or whether they're HSBC, to take two examples, instantly. And the reality is that very, very few, if any, of the legacy banks have got to that kind of completely seamless digital experience. And I think the second is how you use these amazing new capabilities that are emerging in the world of AI that we've been just talking about. So I think that's all relevant. I think in Asia, we have many examples of digital banks. In the case of Singapore and Hong Kong, we have digital bank licenses that have been created to create a whole raft of regulated competitors for traditional banks. I think the answer so far is that some of them have done a good job in creating a good customer experience. None of them has yet scaled, and none of them is yet a major competitor to the incumbent institutions. But the lessons from them is that it is possible to onboard a customer in 2 or 5 minutes and to use a lot of automation in the KYC process, the onboarding process, and the data gathering process. Anyway, let me talk briefly about Ping An. Ping An, as you probably know, is a very large company where our largest business is insurance, but we also have a very large bank. We are the second largest credit card issuer in China, as just one example. We're the largest car financier in China, in the bank, and many other things. Across the group, we have about 260 million customers. So we have, I think, in the financial services context, a fairly unique scale to work from. We're an entrepreneur-founded company and an entrepreneur-run company that's about now 37 years old, something like that. So we're somewhat different from pretty much every other institution in China. All other major institutions are basically SOEs, so we're quite different in character. And Ping An has been on a technology journey for the last 15 or so years to completely reinvent itself as a digital company. And that has included moving the entire company to a private cloud and pretty much re-architecting and rewriting every application that we have in the company over a very, very long period of time. On the data side, I'll just quickly talk through some examples of what we've been up to, particularly in the AI space. We've been working in AI for about a decade. We decided to go to recruit top-tier, let's say, Carnegie Mellon PhDs in machine learning and artificial intelligence about a decade ago to build our initial applications. So for us, this has been a learning journey. With the advent of GPT, of course, there's a jolt and a very sudden change in the level of capability that we've had. But part of the consequence of the 10-year journey we've been on is we've built a lot of data capabilities. I think both of our speakers so far have talked about the necessity of creating data platforms that allow you to use AI tools in a systematic way. So for us, we have very powerful structured data tools. We have very powerful unstructured data tools, which include the ability to create, we call them small language models, but they've still got billions of parameters, but basically large language models that are specific to our own domains. If you go to GPT or the Baidu or any of the other platforms, DeepSeek even, they will never have access to our proprietary customer conversations or our proprietary documentation, our proprietary contracts. So we need domain-specific models that we can then put alongside generic models to be able to use unstructured data in an intelligent way. And very, very importantly, on the third column, a federated learning model. So we've got many legal entities. One of the myths in China is that it's kind of a data Wild West. That is not true at all. We are absolutely not allowed to share data from one legal entity to another. We're not allowed to do anything without customer permission. In fact, our data guidelines pretty much are the same as yours in Europe. So we have a lot of technology to anonymize data, aggregate data, to be able to apply machine learning to decentralized data that sits within protected legal vehicles. We have a whole architecture for how we manage data. I don't have time to go through that. We have many, many use cases across the company. I'm just going to talk about a couple, just given the few seconds that I have. One is we have a chat.
You have a minute more, no problem.
I've got some more time. Okay, thank you. We've got some chatbot engines. So we're not really interested in designing one great chatbot. We've created a capability where basically any marketeer or anybody in charge of a customer process can build their own workflow using our kind of design tool. And the consequence is we have many, many robots that do all kinds of things, both for our internal staff as well as for customer-facing functions. We're very, very careful when we apply these things to customers because you need to be very, very thoughtful about exactly what you're telling your customers and what the adverse consequences can be. And we're in constant dialogue with our regulators, who are increasingly constructive and sophisticated, I will say. And the consequence right now, we're at about, even 2 years ago, we were at 2.6 billion consumer interactions using these tools. And we've really covered a very, very wide range of domains. So this really is just part of the bread and butter, if I may say, of how we run our company, how we run every function in the company, how we run every interface with our consumers across the business. Secondly, we're the largest car insurer in the world. So we have millions, we have about 60 million car insurance contracts in force at any moment in time. We now we issue about 70% with basically AI to be able to help customers make sure they give us the right documents, the right information, to be able to make inferences, to be able to make, let's say, educated guesses where we need to, probabilistic-based guesses where we need to be able to complete the information set we need to. And we're issuing about 10,000 contracts a day, basically, essentially using an AI engine that's interfacing directly with clients, as well as those policies where there's some person involved. We have a very large agency force. We still use agents on the life insurance side of our business. So we're using these tools as a supplement to assist the agents and guide them to know exactly what to ask the customer, not to waste their time, and to be able to make the process as streamlined as possible. A third example is intelligent underwriting. So we've created a generic underwriting engine to be able to massively increase the speed and the accuracy of underwriting. There's many kind of steps to it and components to it. The bottom line is we've been able to improve underwriting efficiency across the whole company by about 60%, and we've been able to improve the quality of that underwriting by about 38%. And we're talking about across about 6,000 products. So we're taking all of those examples that are not completely automated, where there's some manual intervention, there's some salesperson involved, and there's some discussion involved. How do you basically streamline and use intelligence to kind of guide the decision-making and speed up the process? And the last thing I'll say before stopping is governance is really, really important. So we're an enterprise-wide AI company. As I mentioned, we've got a constant interface and dialogue with our regulators, which, as I said, is quite surprisingly to me constructive. Our regulators view AI as fundamental to the future, but they're extremely concerned about the downsides, and they're extremely cautious about the downsides, in particular for individual consumers. So that's the balance they and we are trying to achieve. So across our organization, we have business committees in every business. We have to make sure our staff are really aware of what our guidelines are, that they're properly trained, they understand the pluses and the minuses, in addition to how you actually can get some value out of these tools. We really have a lot of guidelines, principles, and procedures around how we manage data, how we keep it secure and private, but also how we govern all of the models that we have. So I'll stop there just to give you a flavor of sort of how we're thinking about this. So let me leave it there, and we can maybe have a broader conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this was quite impressive, to be honest. I think Ping An, in this case, is showing us where we need to be in Europe, at least, and how this journey could be. As I still don't have any questions. There is one. Then let's go ahead. Do we have a microphone?
Or just tell it and I'll repeat it.
My question is for Jonathan. Jonathan, as Ping An is deeply rooted in an AI-embracing society in the mainland, right? Okay. Let me repeat with a microphone. My name is Jochen Biedermann from the World Alliance of International Financial Centers. Jonathan, as Ping An is deeply rooted in an AI-embracing society in the mainland and also very active in Hong Kong. Do you see a role for Hong Kong in bridging from the mainland to, let's say, more risk-averse parts of the world like continental Europe? And could this lead to a convergence of those AI-driven solutions that they can be used globally?
I think the answer is very much yes. I think the example of Ping An is, I think, interesting to European financial institutions because if you dig under the covers, we actually have had to deal with many of the same constraints that you face here under GDPR and other regulatory guidelines with respect to the use of technology. I think the recent announcements by DeepSeek and the incredibly impressive power of their models, which we're starting to use ourselves, of course, is an example of how Chinese tech companies are able to compete at a global level, and I'm sure will be very, very keen to promulgate their services and platforms around the world. I mean, of course, there's geopolitical sensitivity. We shouldn't be naive, but I think for the kind of thing we're talking about, I think those sensitivities can be managed. And I think in a world where maybe Europe is going to be a little less, let's call it intuitively close to the United States, to be able to have world-class products from places like China, I suspect will be somewhat welcome.
Thank you very much. Just coming back to what you said, you have a very constructive dialogue with the regulators, right? And basically the Ping An story was a 10 years journey. Basically refurbishing everything. We heard about technical debt, technology debt, which is in every bank. What do you think is the current challenge or the roadblocker for European and especially German banks, why we do not on this 10 years journey already since 5 years?
Yeah. Well, first of all, probably the way Ping An did it is not going to be the way every company does it. I doubt whether most companies want to go and hire 2,000 data scientists and go and learn, basically build the building blocks from scratch and learn the lessons over a decade. So the question is, what's the more expedient way to do that, given where we are? So is there a leapfrog opportunity for companies that haven't been on this journey so far? I think the answer is probably yes, but I think there are some very significant constraints that most companies have. And I think we've talked about legacy systems for Christian and Marco in their sections. And I think these are really, really difficult constraints. And most banks are still running on a mainframe environment. I mean, how can we even be talking about mainframe environments in 2025? What industries are stuck with mainframes? And the process to get off those mainframes is quite complicated. There aren't that many ready-made products. One of the companies we have happened to invest in is called 10x Banking out of London, which is one player, but there's only 4 or 5 platforms that are really credible, I think, and that I know of in the world.
Yep.
Of course, the core platform itself is just one component in usually an infrastructure involving sometimes 250, 300 subsystems, of which the core, or maybe the cores, many banks have multiple cores, might be 5 or 6. So this is a much more complicated problem. But I think unless banks are able to embrace that long journey of migrating away from that outdated legacy infrastructure, maybe in parallel with making sure they have a data layer that allows them to start using real-time data or making real-time data available and start using some of these GenAI technologies fed by that data. I think that's the path, but it's a very difficult balance. We were just talking before we started the session. This is not going to be a 2-year process. It's not going to be a 3 or 4 year process. It's going to be probably a 5+ year process, maybe longer, and it's going to be beyond the horizon of most people's jobs.
Exactly.
And I think organizations have to think very differently to try and grapple with that.
Thank you. Perhaps I would also pose this question to Marco and to Christian, whoever wants to go first, because yes, this 10 years journey, you need to hold the steering wheel, right? And it's more of 1 decade of board members who need to support this journey. So again, the question, why aren't the German banks not on the transformation journey already? Or are they? Not
Being
sure.
a German bank, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to strengthen what Jonathan said. I don't really see regulatory constraints, not yet. By the way, I don't like complaining about regulation. Usually we have the same interest, security and no data leakages at all. Therefore, having said that, from my point of view, perhaps we have some cultural restraints within the companies. We have always some kind of business line and IT. IT is a kind of service provider for the business line. Demand, they order IT and they have to manage it. And of course, that's what you've said. We talk about legacy systems. I'm very happy, I'm very grateful that we have no mainframe, no host legacy at DZ Bank for, let's say, 10 years now. And it has helped us. You are, let's say, some years ahead, I guess, of us, perhaps of many banks in Germany. We are quite fast in Germany. We have started before 2000 and let's say 2020, something like that. But it's still a struggle. Of course, a struggle for skills, for budget, of course. But we are on our way. What helps us, of course, is the lack of legacy. That's
For DZ.
yeah.
Yeah.
At least that is it, yes.
So my impression is it starts with what type of bank do you want to have in the future? So do you want to keep on running a bank like you know it? Then you're probably on the bandwagon of improving incrementally your IT and going on doing the same you had, achieving more with less. And that's the logic that I talked about with the automation. If you're on that track, you're never going to pay all your technical debt. Because your technical debt will never have a positive business case in the first place. So you'll sit on your mainframe forever.
Yeah.
If that fits to your strategic playbook, because you're on a runoff model, or you want to be cost leader, or whatever it is that fits to that structure, you're fine. If not, you have a structural or strategic problem. The banks that I've seen think about re-innovating their core have never made that an IT architecture investment.
Yeah.
To them, it's been always the question, what's our playbook for growth in the future? And then you start then you start doing very different conversations. Then you think about, okay, what's the entry ticket to that new playbook? And then you end up with strategic invests that have a lot of zeros attached to that. And you have to write them off in the first year because there is no business case. This is a strategic option you buy. Yeah. And as a function of that, you then start building from scratch or whatever your playbook is, your capabilities of the future. When listening to Ping An, and I'm grateful that you shared also the different layers of complexity that you have to become an all AI company, I've seen at least 5 barriers for a traditional bank as I know it. It starts with having all your data structures in order. I haven't found a single bank so far, excuse me. I've not seen it, right? I'm not that deep into all banks. There might be some, but my general impression is no, not necessarily. Second one is, do we have data platforms that allow us to build data products? No, we don't have that either, right? Then on top of that, the question is, what is our thinking? What will we do with it? Will we build, you mentioned microservice architectures. I don't speak to that many people in core banking that use that language or that use that metaphor. Building blocks, I would call it Lego bricks, so that I can build Lego in banking. That's not the conversation I'm having, right? I might be talking to the wrong people. That might be wrong. Might be the case, right? But that's my impression. But that's the precondition for becoming a pure data-driven digital company. And to me, it starts with, what do you want to be? And unless there is clarity, I have a hard time in coming up with recommendations and reflections. Just one comment on the regulator. And again, I'm not an expert on regulation. But my perception is that very often this is about being on eyes level when speaking about technical possibilities. And I have very often the impression that we do not have that eye-level conversation in technical preconditions and consequences with the regulator. And every time we're uncertain about things, as a risk aversion strategy, you say you cannot do that. That's the logical consequence. So my lever here would be to work on leveling up the competency level on all sides so that we can move forward and together think of compliant, future-proof, but innovation-friendly environment.
Yeah, that's
and I'm going to close with my last pitch. My last pitch is when speaking to Swiss banks, I would always argue for the case, why is digital banking made in Switzerland, not data privacy and compliance built in by design? That's the pitch. On the world market, we're going to compete with everyone with the best security and data privacy protection by Swiss standard laws. That would be differentiating to me.
Thank you. So now looking at, there's a lot to do. The regulator is not the foe. We need to embrace it and we need to manage it on eye level. I agree. We saw that there was a long journey at Ping An, but you have a clear strategy and there was a clear business case, I must admit. There's always a business case. The question is, when is the return point, right? Now looking at, and you said there's still a Auftragnehmer, Auftraggeber situation in business and IT. Just going back to the first pillar I introduced at the very beginning in terms of talent development, right? The interesting part is you was never talking about which part of the company, if this is business or IT, this was all in one, right? What you showed. And we talked about operating models, right? And perhaps there are different kind of operating model you need along the journey from now you need to change, you need to get rid of the IT debt, and then you can go on and rebuild your organization or do it in parallel, right? So my last question is, in terms of talent, what do you think, starting with you, Christian, what do you think needs to happen to get those teams, especially in a German-driven culture, together to have this mindset from technology-enabled business people and business-enabled technology people?
I don't want to talk about agile teams or something like that, but it's close to that what I mean. What I recommend, what I ask my people for is, I need a much more understanding with the IT guys for the business, and vice versa. I need much more understanding in the business lines for the needs and the possibilities of IT. IT does make a difference, but sometimes we always my point of view, when we talk with business lines, we talk about front end, about applications, but not about platforming, data models, infrastructure, network, and so on. When we talk about regulation, once again, we are very used to complain about regulation. And it's very difficult not to kill innovation. But we have, of course, a zero mistake and a zero trust environment. We are a bank, of course, we are systemically relevant. We cannot afford one single data breach. Therefore, of course, security is an issue. And not to kill innovation is sometimes a challenge. Try and error. Try is okay, error only sometimes, yeah, to be honest.
Thank you. Your last comment on talent?
I'd say on talent, so for Ping An, first of all, acquiring tech talent and AI talent, AI machine learning talent over a very long period of time has been an important priority. And I think we tried to build the brand of the company such that it's an attractive place for people with advanced qualifications and real skills to come. I mean, you can go to Google or to Meta or somewhere like that, and you're going to be lost in this sea of very smart people doing all kinds of things, who knows what. But at Ping An, we can give you use cases and platforms that you can work on and see what your work results in. I think it's quite satisfying. We're also lucky because we can tap into a lot of Chinese US talent that are quite interested in still being associated with a company like Ping An. We have a research center in Palo Alto, for example, that's a good conduit for people from that world to come and work there, and then if they choose to eventually come to China, maybe stay in the States, we don't really care. So that's one. And I think to your point, management has to be tech literate, data literate, and AI literate. It has to be the language of the company.
Yeah.
And in our case, for sure, it took a long time for some of these old line business managers who are basically great people leaders and intuitive entrepreneurs to learn how to speak in this language and how to use these tools. But I think we've made very, very good progress. That comes from enormous top-down pressure. It comes from the chairman and the CEO of the company demanding that from everybody that he interacts with. And frankly, if you can't step up, you're probably not going to survive. That's really how it works.
Thank you very much. Very, very last words from Marco.
There are already some very interesting concepts that you can see with some of the, let's call it more digital native banks in Southeast Asia. I find, for instance, very interesting when you look at DBS, they have a concept they call two in a box. And two in a box means that there is no single incentivized or incentive for a line manager without a matching IT counterpart. It's always two in a box. So because the only way how you can make an effect in the bank is if you have IT aligned. And the easiest way, in the pragmatic Singaporean way, is, okay, you put the money where the mouth is. And that's one way how you structure then incentive schemes, right? It's one little element in a very nuanced way of managing a new target operating model, but there are already some things we can consider for changing if we want to.
Yeah, you should.
Very, very thank you. Very impressive, very exciting. I think we all have time later today for the networking part. If you want to continue the discussion, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having us. Have a nice evening.
Thanks.
Well done. Thank you.